at 4 right here on The Point. Races set.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Michael on his way out. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. Still a tropical storm, but just barely the remnants of what was Hurricane Michael, now moving across coastal Virginia and soon headed out to sea. Well, back in Florida, the cleanup has begun.
For many residents of Panama City, the only way to get out is with a chainsaw. Hundreds of roads are blocked by downed lines and trees, including 150-year-old oaks. Major thoroughfares are reduced to one lane. Buildings are shredded. There's no power and limited phone service.
Fox's Rick Leventhal reports many areas are still under a dusk-to-dawn curfew. An insurance industry analyst predicts that Michael will cost private insurers about $8 billion, and that's not counting property covered by national flood insurance. A court hearing is beginning in Izmir, Turkey, for American pastor Andrew Brunson. There are reports he could be freed after 2 years of being held on charges related to an attempted coup against Turkey's President Erdogan 2 years ago. Brunson denies those charges. The U.S. is stepping up pressure on Saudi Arabia over the disappearance of a Washington Post journalist last seen at a Saudi consulate in Turkey.
State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert says the U.S. wants information from the Saudi government.
The U.S. government is extremely concerned about this situation. This has the highest attention.
Jamal Khashoggi, a critic of the Saudi regime, went into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul a week ago and disappeared. Turkish officials, through state media, claim Saudi assassins murdered and dismembered Khashoggi. Saudi Arabia has denied involvement. Democrats and Republicans on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee have triggered an investigation requiring the U.S. sanction whoever's found responsible.
Fox's Rich Edson. After 2 days of dramatic drops on Wall Street, signs of a possible rebound. Dow futures are nearly 300 points higher, and Asian stocks trading higher as well. This is Fox News.
For over 30 years, Sanford Technology Group has been helping companies throughout Guam and Micronesia with their payroll, time and attendance, networking, and other information technology services. Our online integrated payroll and time and attendance solution provides the workforce management tools and expertise to make your business more efficient and employee-friendly. For more information, visit Sanford Technology at 335 South Marine Corps Drive or call us at 647-0220 to schedule a demo today.
Calvo started with a simple handshake. As we celebrate 80 years, we extend a hand to all of you who have taken our hand in trust, to the dreamers and realists, the families, the businesses, the young at heart and the old souls, our manumku and our children. From all of us to all of you, our deepest, happiest, and infinite thanks.
80 years here for you. 80 years thanks to you. Calvo's Insurance, a legacy of trust.
The Supreme Court said it could, but Tennessee opted not to execute Edmund Zagorski on Thursday evening. Governor Bill Haslam ordering a 10-day reprieve. After a lower court ruled the state could not use its preferred 3-drug lethal injection mixture. State of Washington is shelving its death penalty after a court ruling.
All 9 justices on the state Supreme Court ruled the death penalty has to end because it's not being fairly applied. They considered in their ruling a study commissioned by the legal team of a death row inmate. It found the death penalty is given 4.5 times more to black defendants than white ones. Governor Jay Inslee supports abolishing it, but knows not everyone is. He said he talked to victims of those on death row, including a man whose daughter was murdered.
He said, look, Governor, all you need to understand is I'm an eye for an eye kind of guy. I mean, basically, that's what I believe. And I understand that.
Inslee said he would sign a legislative measure eliminating the death penalty, but while one passed the Senate earlier this year, it failed to pass the House. Jessica Rosenthal, Fox News.
Legendary guitarist calling for an end to corporate politics in Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominations.
Eagles guitarist Joe Walsh complains to TMZ it's not the artists or the fans choosing who gets memorialized in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
The corporate sponsors get to pick, and then the people get to vote. There's a lot of people, I don't know why they're in there.
As for who should be in there, Walsh is pushing for a guitarist that's been pushed aside by time, named Link Wray, who died 13 years ago.
He had a song called Rumble. And all us guitar players wanted to be Link Ray.
Walsh himself was inducted into the Rock Hall as a member of the Eagles back in 1998. Jill Nato, Fox News.
And in Washington, New York, I'm Jack Callahan, and this is Fox News.
Family Finance, serving the people of Guam since 1959. Now you can start planning for the holidays by getting a personal Christmas loan from $1,000 up to $3,500. Family Finance has 3 convenient locations to serve you. Give them a call in Dededo, 633-4473, Hagåtña, 475-4545, and the Upper Tumon location on the 2nd floor of the Pacific Building at 647-5626. Get your Christmas loans today from Family Finance.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is being brought to you by Sanford Technology Group, STG, delivering service that can't be beat.
Grilled salmon, petite sirloin. Can't decide.
What are you doing?
Making my top 10 list of favorite dishes at Ruby Tuesday.
You really need to get a hobby.
But I can't decide. There's no way I can narrow down so many classic dishes to just 10.
Then it's a good thing Ruby Tuesday did it for you.
It's the all-time favorites menu at Ruby Tuesday Guam. We took our most popular dishes and put them on one great menu for only $14.99. Hickory pork chop, Parmesan shrimp pasta, prime loco moco. 10 top sellers at one great price. Pick your favorite for a limited time at Ruby Tuesday Guam.
Call the experts at Guam Hearing Doctors if you're worried about your hearing. The evaluation is simple and painless.
Here at APL, our core values give the company its heart and soul. Whether it's connecting your business with our global network through our newly enhanced service or investing our efforts into giving back to the community, APL is committed to serving you. We humbly honor the opportunity to find innovative solutions for you and your business. To learn more about our enhanced service, call 588-4651 or visit www.apl.com/Guam for more details.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The right of, and I'm going to add on to that, the right of the people to keep and bear Facebook with Tall Tales shall not be infringed. So if you are a U.S. Constitution buff, if you value some of the things that the U.S. Constitution provides for those of us living in the American empire, you're at the right place, because we spend a fair amount of time talking about the U.S. Constitution and its application, and that's why I start out with the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution, pointing out that even the Supreme Court can get it wrong sometimes. With respect to the Second Amendment, I've pointed out on more than one occasion that Mr. Justice Antonin Scalia apparently couldn't read the word militia in the Second Amendment. But be that as it may, he did find that there is an individual personal right to keep arms in your house for your own personal defense. The law is very slowly developing on the Second Amendment, and I will keep you informed of the developments. The latest thing that we brought up here on Tall Tales is the fact that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the most liberal of all of the circuits, has found that the Second Amendment not only provides a personal right to keep arms, it also provides a personal right to bear arms. Now, you know, I kind of like to zero in on words and come up with really definite meanings for words. And there's some authority that I could probably dig up if I wanted to spend the time that holds that civilians can't bear arms. In order to bear arms, you must be a military man. Bear having a different meaning than arm yourself or carry or take it away from a policeman and hold it in, you know, this kind of stuff. But anyhow, the Ninth Circuit has found that a person has the ability to walk around in the streets of Honolulu proudly displaying his pistol on his belt. And that was something of a surprise given the liberality of the Ninth Circuit. And what Justice Thomas says is the Supreme Court's kind of dissing of Second Amendment cases. There haven't been very many Second Amendment cases. In fact, I don't think there have been any since Justice Scalia was able to get the court to grant cert on McDonald versus Chicago. And Justice Thomas has written a short opinion in some case saying, you know, we're not giving the proper respect here to Second Amendment jurisprudence. So I do, and I'll keep my eyes open for whatever breaking news there is that I think you'll find interesting. So before I even get a chance to welcome back, how does that song go, Real Joe Cruz?
Welcome back.
Yeah, to welcome back the usual suspects here on Tall Tales. I've got a call from Louie. So, hello, Louie. How you doing?
Real good. Afternoon, Bob. You know, I've always found it interesting with regards to discussions held on the Second Amendment that the word that does not catch as much attention as it should is the word people. I defer to your knowledge on this, but it's my understanding that whenever there's a reference to the people in the Constitution, we're talking about individual rights that are independent of whether or not they're attached to a particular group, such as we might refer to the militia as a group of people volunteered or designated by the state. So to me, the clear reading of the Second Amendment, when it refers to the people, is that each of us individually has that right.
What would you do with the word militia, Louis?
Well, my understanding from an historical standpoint is the militia was a group that always was comprised of individuals that did not have any organized allegiance to the state or to the country, because the country wasn't a country as we now understand it prior to when they're called to arms. And so from an historical, sociological standpoint, the reference to the militia was always a reference to individuals.
Well, okay. Let's say that I give your your singling out of the word people its maximum breadth, but militia is used several places in the Constitution, and it has a meaning. And I've gone through this before. It has the meaning of a state armed force, not a group of folks who have a musket hanging over the fireplace. And I've cited other parts of the Constitution that are in accord. As an example, the Fifth Amendment, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia. So, and there are several other places in the Constitution where the militia is used in that same context, leading me to believe that the militia is not just, well, at the time of the Constitution, everybody had a musket and they all went out squirrel hunting, and that was a militia. I don't read that into it. And as a general rule, if you have terms in a legal document, you try to reconcile those terms. You try to come up with an interpretation where each of those terms has a meaning. So the militia, at least according to some of the authorities that I would champion, was the people's right to keep and bear arms, and it wasn't an individual right. Furthermore, the Bill of Rights was to protect the states from the national government, the states and the people in the states from the national government. So Justice Scalia really had to reach to find that individual right in the District of Columbia, which isn't a state. But that's a little bit off your point. But I hear what you're saying about people, and
right. And my understanding is part of the way of looking at this, and I'd have to reread them to give you the specific one, but my understanding that this reference to an individual right to bear arms could be found in a number of the Federalist Papers which pertain to this subject.
Well, that gets you into the question of how do you go about interpreting the Constitution. You know, we've got the fellows over there on the left, the living Constitution boys, who say, well, these were some principles that people laid out back in 1787, but, you know, we're so much smarter now, so we have to give new meanings to those words. There are originalists and there are textualists. Textualist says you take the words and you take the words with the meanings that they had at the time the Constitution was adopted. The originalist would go around scraping up things like the Federalist Papers and, you know, what people were writing on the wall of the men's room in Constitution Hall, etc. And the problem with the doctrine of originalists is it kind of defaults to the judgment of historians as opposed to legal scholars. And if you look around enough, you'll probably find some kind of some kind of originalist argument to support just about anything. But and that's my criticism of Scalia with his individual rights in the District of Columbia argument. So
I hear you. I hear you. To answer your question to me, I tend to favor the side of original, plain sense meanings of the words. And as I understood what was implied by that statement at the time that the Constitution was written, it was referring to the calling together of individuals for the purpose of forming the militia. You know, we can go back to our elementary school history and the poem of the Minuteman. That Minuteman concept of being called to arms was the individual farmer working on his farms who at the drop of a hat would be called to serve the purpose of whatever had to be dealt with at the time. And he was not necessarily part of the organized group such as we might refer to a reservist today.
Well, it's a beautiful theory, and it's of course a poetic theory, and I suppose it's one that the ancestors of Paul Revere would champion above all others. But you know, the best way to figure out what the Constitution says is to read the Constitution. And you know, I gave you an example from the Fifth Amendment, and here's Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, which lays out the powers of Congress. And paragraph 14, the Congress shall have power to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrection, and repel invasions. Article 15, to provide, as you were paragraph 15, to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectively the appointment of the officers and the authority of the training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. That doesn't sound like one if by land, two if by sea, Louis. And as a general rule, when you're reading a document, you read all parts of the document. You try to harmonize all parts of it.
Oh, I don't think we're necessarily disagreeing, because at the time when the militia was called together, there was not necessarily the understanding that in every single case the state was going to provide the arms to those individuals who showed up, acknowledging that there was an organized army that fought the British. In the early encounters, it was understood that the militia was bringing their own arms for the purpose of accomplishing.
Maybe so, but you know, there are two National Guard units in Massachusetts that trace their lineage back to 1638. They were organized under the colony of Massachusetts even before there was a Constitution. So then there's one other theory of constitutional interpretation, Louis, that I think is perhaps the one that's more used than any other, and that is that some people start out with the result that they're looking for and then work backwards to see if they can find some language somewhere in the Constitution that would, if not justify the result that they've reached, at least explain it. So my experience has been that, you know, that the anti-gunners would read the Second Amendment as saying, if you really want to have a gun, join the National Guard. And the pro-gunners would say, well, no, because of the what I'm going to call the Paul Revere phenomenon, it's obviously that the intention that everybody should be able to have as many guns as he wants and do with them whatever he wants. I think probably a clear reading of the Constitution would reject either of those arguments. And as a matter of preference here on Tall Tales, we try not to be results-oriented. We try to be more process-oriented and try to figure out what the laws, rules, statutes, and constitutions, et cetera, mean in the abstract, as opposed to starting out with something we really like and then work backwards from that.
I hear you. So is the implied conclusion that the so-called individual right to bear arms attends only to those members who are part of an organized militia?
I think that's a tenable reading, and I'm pretty critical of Justice Scalia because he's my least favorite Supreme Court justice because of his penchant for setting forth what he says is the way the Constitution should be interpreted, and then abandoning that to find some other result. It would have been better if Justice Scalia had zeroed in on the Ninth Amendment for his individual rights to bear arms, because I think there's a much better argument under the Ninth Amendment than there is under the Sixth. The Ninth says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So, you know, the Paul Revere argument, I think, fits much better into the Ninth Amendment than it does to the Second.
Well, what would your take be on the rather common occurrence when there's discussions about the Second Amendment, inclusive of Scalia's ruling that you just mentioned, that so often the reference is to whether or not there's a right to bear arms for the purpose of personal self-defense or self-defense of personal home, as opposed to what I think we're both agreeing to is the real purpose of the Second Amendment is to give the states, the individual, or by extension the individuals, the ability to defend against an oppressive federal government or the larger state.
Well, ironic.
That gets lost so often.
Well, it got lost in Heller and McDonald because Scalia found an individual personal right for a person to keep arms in his house to defend himself. So, and that's why I say he's quick to come up with a theory of constitutional interpretation, but even quicker to abandon it to reach the result that he wants.
Okay, yeah, I see your point.
Well, glad you called, Louis. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Good discussion, Bob.
I hope you're a member of the Tall Tales Nation.
Well, how else would I know to call on at this time?
Okay. Thanks a lot, Louis. See you later.
Take care, Bob. Take care. Yeah.
So a good way to start the program talking about the Second Amendment and Mr. Justice Antonin Scalia, et cetera. And let's see. I guess Ishmael Velez has a way of going about his Tall Tales enjoyment a little different from others. He says he's at the pool at Leo Palace enjoying the water, the sun, and some tall tales. That's a great combination, Ishmael. Congratulations on that one. And Juanita, of course, is here. And Brad is here, and Brad is locked and loaded. Perhaps chafing a little bit about my explication of what the Second Amendment really ought to mean in the hands of a literist jurist. But It's okay. And Carl is here, urging on the Tall Tales posse. And let's see, who else have I got? John Dalzell and Linda Gabriel. Good afternoon, Linda, and Hafaday, Shelley Gibson, Enrico Blancafor, and Sonny Cruz. So I guess we've got a quorum. I think you got your gavel there handy. We've got a quorum, so I'm going to call Tall Tales to order for today. All right, so we're going to start out with, as is our usual custom, with Zemi Ikotny, which always causes the real Joe Cruz to play the theme music from Meet the Press. We call it Zemi Ikotny here. We try to give some things a sort of a Chamorro dimension when we can. And I'm going to break with tradition today. I'm going to start out with the Post and wind up with the Daily News. And I'm going to do a little mining on the Post editorial page, which I do from time to time. So the Post says charter schools should not be funded out of DOE's budget. And this has been a bone of contention. I picked up on the DOE resolution the other day where they're asking for another $15.4 million, and their justification is that they need that money to comply with the 14 points required in the Every Child Act. The Every Child is entitled to an adequate public education. So they got kudos from Tall Tales on that one. And they also made the point that they have to fund charter schools, and the funding that they have to give the charter schools is based on initial enrollment. So as children drop out of the charter school, perhaps drift to the public schools, the financing is fixed. So this is what the editorial picks up on, and they make some pretty good points. The problem for GDOE is that when these students left the GDOE school system and enrolled in the charter schools, public schools' fixed cost remained relatively the same, paying for power and water bills, providing air conditioning, paying for janitorial work, and making sure teachers are paid, among other expenses, haven't decreased for public schools despite the departure of some schools to charter schools. Public schools' fixed costs have remained the same or may even increase, especially for utilities. The student population loss has been negligible budget-wise for each school. The 1,700 students from dozens of schools, not just from a few schools. This is from the chairman of the board, Mark Mendiola. Our public school kids need these resources, and we are cutting the pie even smaller. So the Post says as long as charter schools get the bulk of their funding from GovGuam, they should be subject to the same yearly audit standards. And the next set of lawmakers and the next governor need to rethink the funding formula where charter school funding should come from for the interest of the tax-paying public in general. So not hard-hitting, not edgy, but informative, and it interprets the news in such a manner as to help the average reader understand exactly what's going on. So pretty good. I'm going to come back after this short break with the nugget that I mined from the editorial page of the Post, and then we'll go to the Daily News editorial, which is a real zinger today.
I'm John Gibson. This is My Word. The story of the first African-American woman, self-made millionaire, is a story of rising up from slavery. Sarah Breedlove was born in 1867 to a father and a mother who had been enslaved. She was the first member of her family to be born after the Emancipation Proclamation, the first born into freedom. Doesn't mean life was easy. She was married at 14, but her husband died when she was 20, and she was left a widow with a 2-year-old daughter. She moved around a lot, supporting her daughter as a cook, a seamstress, making about $1 a day. She was poor but determined to earn enough to get her daughter an education. She got a job selling hair care products to African-American women, and that's when she got her own ideas for hair care. At age 37, she started her own hair care business named after her new husband. Well, sort of. It was the Madam C.J. Walker hair care line. She established her own factory. She claimed to have trained 20,000 saleswomen. She also gave money to African-American causes. She gave $5,000 to the NAACP's anti-lynching fund, at that time the largest donation ever by an individual to the civil rights group. Sarah Breedlove, a.k.a. Madam C.J. Walker, an American success story. I'm John Gibson. That's my word.
Security Title is honored to join in sponsoring Ray Gibson on the Point. Half a day. I'm Rita Tidegui of Manila, and this is where I start my day, listening to the voices of our community and sharing thoughts about issues that affect all of us. It all boils down to our people and our land. Ingatan ang iyong tahanan. Protect your home. When purchasing or refinancing your home, remember to call the professionals at Security Title, just like you call Ray Gibson in the morning.
We now return to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, soaring over the confusion with his superpowers of truth. Call 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Okay, so here we are, mining a nugget that I found on the editorial page of the Post. It's a letter to the Post from Doris Brooks, who, as you know, is a candidate for Washington rep. She's running against Michael San Nicolas, and we have talked about one of the things that they are contesting quite a bit yesterday. Doris says that she wants to go to Congress, and she wants Congress to, in a sense, bless the mechanism of the Chamorro Land Trust Act. In other words, immunize the Chamorro Land Trust Act from an equal protection suit or such other lawsuits as might arise under the U.S. Constitution. And I have concurred that that is possible under the state of the law as it applies to Guam. And if that's what you want, that's the way to do it. Michael San Nicolas, on the other hand, said, no, what we want to do is Guam should be recognized as an Indian tribe. And I pointed out, first of all, the impossibility of such a thing, because all of the Indian tribes that there will ever be were in existence at the time that the Constitution was ratified. Look at Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 3, and that makes it quite clear. And Michael cited to a section of federal law as his ratio decidendi as to why such a thing would be possible, but the section of law that Michael cited to is a federal aid statute. So we're not interested in federal aid statute. What we're interested in here is an actual provision that would have the same dimension as a constitutional provision here on Guam. So what Michael is asking for, first of all, can't be done. And second, even if it could, is that what we would want to do even if it were possible? Because the mechanism for Indian tribes and reservations is that the tribal lands, the reservations are actually, I hate to use this word, but I'll use it, federal property of the national government, and not of the people that happen to live on the reservation. So a high degree of control by the national government is involved in this recognized tribal status. And Doris ticked most of that off. In her arguments, she made a reference to the anti-alienation provision of law in the CNMI Constitution that said that not everyone can own land in the CNMI. You have to be a citizen of Northern Marianas descent. in order to own realty in the Northern Marianas. And she used that as an explanation. I explained all this. I could see how the newspaper was misled, or perhaps the newspaper misquoted Doris, but as an example of Congress's ability to restrict alienation of land, etc., she cited to the Northern Marianas. The Post picked up on that and said, this is a dumb idea. We don't want to have that law on Guam. We don't want it, a law on Guam that said only Chamorros can own land. So now Doris is coming back with her letter to the editor. I hope she was listening to Tall Tales the day that we went through this, because I think it was quite thoroughly and quite clearly explained then. So she comes back with that, and she does a pretty good job. And then, as far as I'm concerned, she really steps in it, because she's not satisfied with clearing up her position. She has to slide into identity politics, which I am not in favor of. You know, I would criticize on two bases. One, I think it's bad policy. And two, I can't see that it's politically very advantageous. You've heard me talk about my political prism. I have it here. I ought to get a political prism and bring it with me. But it's one of those things that when I look through the political prism, it filters out all considerations except the truly political. It filters out morality, public policy, the law, legality, good manners, bad breath, you name it. And the only thing that gets through that political prism is political considerations. So here's what Doris says. The Guam Daily Post editorial of October 5 incorrectly suggests that I want to restrict ownership of all land in Guam to Chamorros. At the Women's Chamber of Commerce Forum, I cited the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act and the Northern Marianas Constitution as examples of federally blessed law intended to protect indigenous cultures and traditions, not necessarily patterns to be followed. My concern is only with land held by the Chamorro Land Trust, not private or other government land. And then she winds up by saying, as I said at the forum, I am proud of my Chamorro heritage and will fight in Washington to protect Guam's culture and traditions. Well, what else are you going to say? You kind of got to say that, right? It's kind of like saying, hey, I'm for the people. I haven't seen a candidate yet who came along and said, you know, I'm running for office, but I'm really not for the people. So if she had just left it at that, probably would have been okay for Tall Tales purposes. But she threw in the identity politics. And this is what she said. And she says, my objective is to keep the Chamorro Land Trust property in the hands of Guam's indigenous people. Well, we've known that ever since it came along in the 12th Guam legislature. I've commented on it a million times here and said, you know, when it comes to defending that fair housing suit, it's going to be really hard to make the defense that there's no racial element here, because even the champions of the Chamorro Land Trust Act will come out and say, this is all about Chamorros. So I can understand that. I'm not in favor of anything that restricts the free alienation of land, because I think it's an economically unsound path to follow. But I understand this cultural argument, et cetera. But I don't understand this. It bears remembering that persons of European origin, call them migrants, homesteaders, colonists, whatever, have displaced or marginalized indigenous populations throughout North America and Hawaii by usurping native land rights and worse. So I don't see the wisdom of including that in something that started out to be a pretty good idea. I think it's bad. I think identity politics are bad public policy. And of course, in this politically correct era of the 21st century, it's all about identity politics, which are a creature of cultural Marxism, which I may get into in the last 10 minutes of the program when I promised some social commentary. But it all kind of comes from the same source. And I think that it tends to work hardships on everyone, especially those who avail themselves of the fruits of identity politics. So putting that aside and then picking up my political prism, that's the glass object that when I look through it, it filters out everything except what's good politics, and it would let you know what's bad politics. This is not good politics for Doris to start pounding on people of European origin, calling them colonists. You know, colonists is kind of the C word for folks with pale complexions. Oh, you're a colonist. Colonist isn't quite as bad as settler, but it comes from the same place. It's not a nice thing to call people. If your neighbor, say, were from Michigan, you wouldn't want to say in front of his children, you know, your dad's not a bad guy for a colonizer. It just doesn't fit very well. So remembering that there is a certain mathematics that goes with politics, and the mathematics is that politics is a science of addition, not subtraction, and certainly not division. So if you gratuitously throw out a line embodying language like European origin, homesteaders, colonists, etc., the only result that can come from that is division. And in the political world, that probably isn't salutary. So that's the Post editorial. And from there, I'm going to go to the Daily News editorial. And I'm going to give the Post editorial about charter schools. I'm going to give them their grade right now. And when I get into the Daily News editorial, you'll see why I'm doing it. So the Post got the blue star today. But the Daily News editorial is a classic case of, well, everybody knows that. And our view, seeking justice. Territories should have voting rights. Earlier this week, the U.S. Supreme Court decided not to review a lower court's decision in Segovia versus United States, a voting rights case involving residents of territories. Now, tall tales people know that what that case turns on is the fact that for the purposes of UCAVA, a statute dealing with absentee voting, Guam is not treated like a foreign country. And that's where the rub comes in. Saipan is, Guam isn't. The lawsuit was filed by Equally American, a group headed by civil rights attorney and former Guam resident Neil Weir. In this case, the group represents veterans and others living in Guam, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands who would be able to vote for president by absentee ballot from Illinois if they lived in other territories or in foreign countries. Now, let me unpack that for you. UCAVA says that, I'm going to use my own case, all right? UCAVA says that if I were to move to Mongolia, now please don't chip in, don't do some crowdfunding to buy me a ticket, okay? But if I were to move to Mongolia and say I'm never going to come back to Guam, Molefa zu todunai ifinu tomorrow tizahu Guam. If I threw away my stash of pugwa and said I'll never eat Keligwan again, I could vote from Mongolia. And let me take that home. I should have used the Wisconsin example. But if I moved from Wisconsin to Mongolia and I said, I'm never going to eat cheese, I hope the Packers lose every game, I'm never going to go back to Wisconsin, Paul Ryan is a dirty skunk and an honorary pig stealer, etc. Because I was eligible to vote for Wisconsin at one time, Wisconsin would have the duty to send me an absentee ballot, and I could vote for, in the 1st Congressional District of Wisconsin, I could vote for Paul Ryan if he were to run again, which he's not. I could vote for senator if it's a senatorial election, and I could vote for president to the same extent that everybody else does, if you understand the Electoral College. That's UCAVA. But if I were to move from Wisconsin to Guam, I wouldn't be able to cast those absentee ballots because Guam is not a foreign country. If I were to move to the Northern Marianas, I would get that absentee ballot. And this is the nuts of Weir's case. This is a denial of equal protection to the people who live in Guam because they're being discriminated against compared to the people who live in the Northern Marianas. Well, there's a really good reason that UCAVA doesn't cover the Northern Marianas, and that is at the time the UCAVA was enacted during the Reagan administration, there was no Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas. So when the definitional section of UCAVA was put together, and defining state as meaning the 50 states, the District of Columbia, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and Guam, there was no CNMI to include. So the CNMI is not included, and that is the thrust of Weir's case. He brought this case in the 7th Circuit, and he lost. And what I thought was a properly reasoned decision. And then the Daily News goes on a little virtue signaling here. The group should be applauded for its efforts to establish federal voting rights for territories. But, of course, that's not what it's doing. It's not establishing federal voting rights for territories. If it does anything, it continues a voting right for someone who lived in one of the 50 states. It's not establishing federal voting rights for the territories. But for voting rights to be meaningful, they should be granted to all eligible adult citizens residing in the territories. And once again, the Post gets carried away by what Governor Calvo said about veterans being able to vote and the fact that Mr. Segovia is a veteran. It has nothing to do with anything except that when you file a suit, if you can, you're looking for an attractive plaintiff. But I'll come back and try to wrap this up here before our big halftime show.
It's important to have claims process that works for you. At Guahan Insurance Services, we make things simple and convenient. Same door you walk in to purchase your insurance is the same door you open to file your claim. We can't pretend that the car insurance claims process is fun, but we can promise a hassle-free and speedy recovery without any runarounds. For your home, auto, and business insurance, visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center on Marine Corps Drive in Tamuning. Don't forget to like us on Facebook or give us a call at 475-1162 or text 929-SAVE. That's 929-7283.
So here we are, back again. So Segovia is a veteran, and the reason the rule is no different from veterans than those who were conscientious objectors in the Vietnam War. It's just that by using veterans for plaintiffs, it gives Weir one more way to demagogue by saying, well, look, these veterans that fought for their country, they're excluded too. A nice argument for the editorial page, but it's not going to get you anywhere in court. The editorial goes on to say, but for voting rights to be meaningful, they should be granted to all eligible adult citizens residing in the territories, much like the 23rd Amendment grants voting rights to citizens in the District of Columbia. Well, even the Daily News gets it right once in a while, and that's the only way this is going to happen, is if the Constitution is amended. Now, rack your brain a little bit and figure out how to amend the United States Constitution so that what amounts to a city of 160,000 people is going to be represented by one member of the House of Representatives and 2 senators. I don't think that's going to happen. And I used the analogy before about my car, my little white car. It's a great car. It's got 4-wheel drive. It does all kinds of things like that, you know, that I needed to do, but it won't fly. So should I take it back to the dealer and say, you know, I want my money back. My car won't fly. Well, it was never designed to fly, and that's the reason it can't fly. And the United States Constitution established a republic, not an empire. So when the United States became an imperialist power, its colonies didn't fit into the republic that the Constitution created. And the colonies are never going to fit in. So what do? I think we've got some alternatives. One alternative is to say Guam should be an independent country. And there's precedent for that. The United States set the Philippine Islands free in 1946 to become an independent country. The other alternative is to say we are part of the American empire. Let's try to make the best of it. And that's the approach that I favor. I think it's the most sensible approach, and it's the one that would be the most beneficial for the most people. I don't think that the Congress and 38 of the states are going to amend the United States Constitution so that people on Guam are going to be able to vote for president or for anything else. In August of 2016, a federal judge ruled that former Illinois residents in the Segovia case did not have the right to cast absentee ballots in that state. No, that's not what the judge ruled. The judge said there is no fundamental right to vote in the territories. Okay, what the judge said was that if you had lived in Illinois and moved to one of the territories, you can't vote by absentee ballot. The judge said there is no fundamental right to vote in the territory, citing U.S. Supreme Court decisions from 1901 called the Insular cases. Now here it comes. In one of those cases, Downs versus Bidwell, the Supreme Court stated, if those possessions are inhabited by alien races differing from us in religion, customs, laws, methods of taxation, modes of thought, the administration and justice according to Anglo-Saxon principles may be for a time impossible. Given the clearly racist language and logic, it's disturbing that voting rights continue to be denied based on the insular cases. You know, it's just what the Daily News said is so wrong that it's hard to know how in a 2-hour show to correct it. I've alluded to this before. I have here a 7-page letter, correspondence between myself and former president of the university, Robert Underwood, going into this alien races argument. And I'm going to spend a little time on this going up until 5 o'clock. This glaring false statement was uttered by Guam historian Ann Parasittori on the TV show called Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. The United States flag is flying over these lands, so some people said, well, doesn't that mean that American laws apply? in 1901, the insular case is basically the judgment of the Supreme Court. The new territories were inhabited by alien, quote, alien races, and they may not be able to understand Anglo-Saxon laws, and therefore the Constitution doesn't have to apply. You won't find any one of the 15 insular cases saying that. You can find that language, and I can explain how that language arises. You know, I suppose one could say that what Ann Parasatore did in order to be the straight man, or the straight person, excuse me, for John Oliver on last week tonight, she did some cherry picking, but I would say it's really more like horse apple picking. My letter goes on to say, Guam historian Ann Parasatore condensed 147 pages of United States Supreme Court opinion into 38 words and presented that 38-word quote as the ratio decidendi and not the hypothetical obiter dictum that it really was. The three concurring opinions from which the court's ruling was derived employed different rationales which yielded the holding in Downs, none of which relied on Guam historian Ann Parasatore's 38 words to reach a result. Guam historian Ann Parasatore's statement smacks of a degree of sophistry that is perhaps fitting for a TV comic, but not coming from a university professor who we should be able to take seriously. Now, that particular case, Downs versus Bidwell, dealt with, I can't remember if it was bananas or sugar. There was DeLima versus Bidwell and Downs versus Bidwell. Bidwell was a collector of customs in New York, and the issue in both of those cases was customs duties payable on the bananas or customs duties payable on the sugar. It wasn't about alien races. And this is what the Downs decision really held. The Downs decision held only that the Uniformity Clause, Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 1 of the Constitution, which reads, "The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, but duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States." That section was not applicable outside the 47 states that made up the Union at the time. Here's the holding. We are therefore of the opinion that the island of Puerto Rico is a territory appurtenant and belonging to the United States, but not part of the United States within the revenue clauses of the Constitution, that the Foraker Act, which was Puerto Rico's Organic Act, is constitutional so far as it imposes duties upon imports from such island, and that the plaintiff cannot recover back the duties exacted in this case. That was the holding. And if I had more time, I'd tell you how that 38 words appears. And the key to understanding that is the word if. It doesn't apply to the territories acquired in the Spanish-American War. It spoke to a potential further expansion of the American Empire. So that's enough for today. I'll pick it up tomorrow if time permits, and you can, Real Joe, can you post this on Facebook? Here's the URL if you want to read the whole letter. Can you post this on Facebook? You cannot, huh? Okay. And I won't have time either, but it's frombob.blogspot.com, and I'll repeat that after the halftime show.
Is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Michael reaches the sea. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. Tropical storm Michael now offshore from Norfolk, Virginia, but as it reached the ocean waters, it re-strengthened a bit. The winds increasing to about 60 miles an hour. Portions of the Virginia and North Carolina coastline still being battered with tropical storm force winds. In Mexico Beach, along Florida's panhandle, residents are being faced with the question of whether to rebuild or move on.
I've never had devastation like this. But I got my memories, but it still hurts so bad.
That's Sherry Dozier, who had evacuated, but when she returned Thursday, found her home was gone.
Governor Rick Scott toured some of the worst hit areas, saying it looked like tornadoes shredded them.
I want everybody to be safe, stay off the roads, don't touch down power lines. If you're going to use a generator, know how it works. You don't put it in your house, so be careful on that. There's still a lot of damage.
Rows of homes smashed to pieces, and many roads are impassable because of debris or water, making it difficult for first responders to reach people who defied evacuation orders. Michael made landfall as the most powerful hurricane to hit the continental U.S. in more than half a century.
Fox's Steve Rappaport. The trial of American pastor Andrew Brunson resuming today in Izmir, Turkey. Brunson denies government spying charges there. The U.S. has been demanding he be set free. There are reports that could happen today. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he hopes it does.
An important step, but make no mistake about it, they shouldn't have held him for all of this time.
If Pastor Brunson is convicted, though, he could face 35 years in a Turkish prison. Reports this morning of a human tragedy in Uganda. The Red Cross reports heavy rains there have triggered mudslides that have left at least 34 people dead. After 2 days of sharp losses, stocks may be rebounding. Asian markets all closing higher Friday. Dow futures are ahead more than 350 points. This is Fox News.
The problem isn't just not being able to hear or understand, or having to tell people to speak louder. Sometimes the frustration is having to repeat yourself too many times, or speaking so loud you're almost shouting. At Guam Hearing Doctors, we understand that hearing problems affect both sides. One of our goals is to help your hearing for those around you. Call us at 989-TEST to learn more.
At the White House Thursday, a photo opportunity like no other.
During a pre-lunch meeting in the Oval Office, rapper and fashion designer Kanye West, wearing a Make America Great Again hat, defended his strong support for the president.
So when I said I like Trump to like someone that's liberal, they'll say, oh, but he's racist. You think racism can control me?
West said he and Hall of Fame running back Jim Brown came to the White House to discuss prison reform and ways to reduce violence in Chicago, arguing that illegal guns are the problem, not legal guns, saying we have the right to bear arms. At the White House, John Decker, Fox News.
Former Deputy National Security Advisor Dina Powell has told the White House she is not interested in serving as the next UN ambassador. Powell says she told the president that her name be removed from the short list because she feels it's not the right time for her family. A Southern California man has been arrested after authorities say he sent an email threatening to kill U.S. Senator Dianne Feinstein. Craig Shaver of Lancaster, California, sent the email September 30th to the senator. Feinstein is the top Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee. She's received threats because of the way the Democrats handled the appointment of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. The National Transportation Safety Board releasing its preliminary findings about those deadly gas explosions in Massachusetts last month.
The NTSB says explosions that damaged homes and other buildings in the towns of Lawrence, Andover, and North Andover were caused when high-pressure gas filtered through low-pressure distribution lines. Columbia Gas, which operates the lines, could not adjust valves to reduce the pressure. That set off warning alarms and led to the explosions and fires that investigators say damaged 131 structures. NiSource, parent company of Columbia Gas, issued a statement saying they are fully cooperating with the ongoing probe and has suspended similar work on low-pressure systems in light of the incident.
Fox's Gernal Scott. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
grilled salmon, petite sirloin. Can't decide.
What are you doing?
Making my top 10 list of favorite dishes at Ruby Tuesday.
You really need to get a hobby.
But I can't decide. There's no way I can narrow down so many classic dishes to just 10.
Then it's a good thing Ruby Tuesday did it for you.
It's the all-time favorites menu at Ruby Tuesday Guam. We took our most popular dishes and put them on one great menu for only $14.99. Hickory pork chop, Parmesan shrimp pasta, prime loco moco. 10 top sellers at one great price. Pick your favorite for a limited time at Ruby Tuesday Guam.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Sanford Technology Group, STG, delivering service that can't be beat.
Here at APL, our core values give the company its heart and soul. Whether it's connecting your business with our global network through our newly enhanced service or investing our efforts into giving back to the community, APL is committed to serving you. We humbly honor the opportunity to find innovative solutions for you and your business. To learn more about our enhanced service, call 588-4651 or visit www.apl.com/Guam for more details.
Life is too short to be isolated from the people you love. Hearing loss is the invisible disability. The experts at Guam Hearing Doctors have solutions.
If you are looking to rent trucks, forklifts, or construction equipment, including Kohler generators, then contact Morrico Equipment on Epow Road, 649-1946, or click morricoequipment.com. Box trucks, reefer trucks, freezer trucks, flatbed trucks, tractor trucks, water trucks, forklifts, excavators, backhoes, loaders, skid steers, bulldozers, compact rollers, telehandlers, boom lifts, scissor lifts, diesel generators, air compressors, light towers. morricoequipment.com.
Walter Gray, Evelyn Elgin, and Sherry Ariarte, I'm really glad you got here to observe that big halftime show that we have every afternoon at 5 here on Tall Tales with the marching bands, the drill team, the synchronized card section in the grandstand, the cheerleaders. And let's see, we added fire eaters about 3 weeks ago, right, Real Joe Cruz?
Yeah, it's going really well.
A lot of fan interest in the fire eaters.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so before I move on to the card, I've got a couple of chores here on Meet the Press. I gotta give the grades. I already gave the Post I gave them the star, and I've got to come back and give the grade to the Daily News. I'm having a little trouble working it out. It's a horrible editorial, and it's most unfortunate because it tends to propagate one of these myths that we constantly have to deal with at a time when clear thinking ought to be at the forefront. You know, we are at a really important time in the political development of this territory. Which direction are we going to go? We've got serious questions of hegemony, colonialism, race, the relationship with our, quote, mother country, relationship with other countries, economy, the coming of the Marines, etc. So we really have to be in a position where we know what we're talking about, and propagating myths like this alien races myth, which is exactly what it is. That's not, that isn't the reason that we aren't able to vote in national elections is not because the insular cases said that people that live here are alien races and therefore the Constitution doesn't have to apply. That's not even close. But when a daily newspaper comes up and on its editorial puts into print what I would characterize as pure BS, it makes it really difficult to deal with the complicated issues that we have to deal with, the things that I just mentioned. So first of all, I'm going to refer the Daily News to this, frombob.blogspot.com, and you could read the entire correspondence exchange between Robert Underwood and me, and that if you can wade through it, it's not short, it's not really easy reading, but if you did, you'd understand what Downs versus Bidwell really says, not what Ann Parasatori said on a TV comedy show, which in the world of propaganda has been something that those who favor identity politics seize upon and will advance towards a particular agenda. As far as the grade for the PDN, this is the grade that I gave them. It's an F-. Real Joe Cruz. Yeah. You know, Real Joe Cruz, you know why I gave the Daily News an F-?
No, I'm not sure.
The reason is because I couldn't figure out a lower grade than that to give them. But because if I could, they really deserve it. I mean, they've come up with some real blunders in the past, but they've sought out a new level this time around. So one of the keys to writing good editorials is you kind of have to know what you're talking about. Okay, back to the card. Next item, or the first item on the card here, is a carryover from yesterday. Lou and Ray versus unborn children. And I started this out with a picture of a pro-life rally that was held last Sunday. And according to the Post, 8 October, hundreds of people participated in that pro-life rally, which I refer to as an anti-abortion rally. Now, political correctness requires that you never use the word abortion in these conversations. Pro-life means that you are against it, and then if you are for it, then you have to use various euphemisms like pro-choice, women's reproductive health, and things like that. But when you come right down to it, abortion is abortion. What it means is extinguishing a life of an unborn child in vitro. And I guess I flunked political correctness when I was going to school because I don't hold much of a brief for it. I see it as not being salutary to the development or the continuation of a free society. So that was the first thing that brought it up, and it caused me to be a little bit querulous, and that was, why is it that you know, when there are people who can be mobilized by reference to pro and anti-abortion, why isn't it an issue in the campaign? And then I posited that I think it's pretty much understood that Lou Leon Guerrero is pro-abortion, and I said, I wonder where Ray Tenorio comes down on the question of abortion. And as if by magic, he was quoted in a Daily News story as he stepped out of being fingerprinted at the pretrial services office downtown. He said, I hope the people understand that I'm here to protect the people of Guam, protect the unborn. So the same day that I said, I wonder about Ray Tenorio, this is what he said. Was this some sort of a telepathic connection? Or is the power of tall tales so strong that even people who do not have an FM headset on are able to detect the signals emanating from this studio? Let's hope it's the latter. So then the next thing that came up was Ray talking about Lou and the abortion question and mentioning Bill 195-32, which is called the relative to protecting infants who are born alive as the result of an abortion through the establishment of the Infant Child's Right to Life Act, the Infant Child's Right to Life Act. And what that bill provides, that if there is an abortion that isn't completed and the child is born alive anyhow, you can't kill the child. That's what this statute says, and if you do, it's murder. Well, Lou came down and testified against that, and there's a video of Lou's testimony that floats around. She's got some pretty good pretext as to why she's testifying against it. Aside, let's leave this up to the doctors, etc. But anyhow, she did testify against it. So again, I posited, well, where is everybody else? Then yesterday, just as we were getting into this, I had a Facebook post from Donna Mila Inta Titano that hit the subject head on, but unfortunately, I lost my Facebook at that very moment. And Facebook and I are, kind of have a truce. I can't really master Facebook, but I do the best that I can with it. I think it's really nice when I can see these comments here, because it kind of helps with the flow of the show. So Donna Mila made that post, and I couldn't read it at the time. When I got home last night, I was able to recover it from my own Facebook page. I couldn't see it here on the desktop. So I'm going to start out this discussion with a post from Donna Mila Titano on yesterday's Tall Tales, which we should have dealt with yesterday, but due to my bungling with Facebook, we couldn't. And here's Donna. So, Bob, Rory stated in the D18 last night that the Democrat Party, via Regine Bisco-Lee, is grateful for Lou and the support her gubernatorial campaign and their platform, and thus, according to Rory, the Democrat Party is moving forward with Lou with LG's platform, pretty much confirming the Democrat Party is now a pro-abortion party. So if that's the case, that means that the folks running on the Democrat ticket are at least arguably pro-abortion. Pretty much, let's see, how do Catholics close their eyes to the fact that the church stated that abortion is a non-negotiable, and thus it is a sin to support, promote, or vote for a candidate who is pro-abortion? Now, an article recently written has stated that Lou's press secretary is Therese Matanani, who holds a paid position in the Archdiocese as the KOLG station manager. KOLG is a radio station run by the diocese. So Therese Matanani is the station manager. How is that even possible? How long is the influential arm of the LG in the Catholics? And then another post, Donna Mila, from Donna Mila, radio station manager thinks it's okay to be also a pro-abortion candidate's press secretary. So here's what Donna Mila is saying. A paid employee of the Archdiocese of Agana, who runs one of their public communications facilities, that is their radio station, is the press secretary for the pro-abortion candidate for governor. And Donna Mila is wondering, is there a disconnect here? How can this be? And I guess my only response to that, Donna Mila, would be, I don't know either. It just seems very, very strange. So out there in our international Facebook audience, and I notice we have international participation from Joe Santos Servino, watching in the Philippines. Hi, Joe. So remember, our phone number is 888-8255. I'd like to hear from anyone who would like to get in on this item on the card, Lou and Ray versus unborn children. This would be a good time to call if you wanted to chime in on that one. And as an alternative, you could do what Donna Mila did yesterday. You can post here on Facebook, and I guarantee you that we will pay a certain amount of attention to your post on that particular subject. So I got a phone call. I hope I got a phone call coming in, because I want to stick with this if I do. If not, I'm going to go on to the next item on the card. I see 2 phones are ringing, so I'm going to just hang on here until the real Joe deals with those calls. Okay, the first one is Bruce. Okay, so hello, Bruce.
Hello, Bob.
How are you, Bruce?
I'm fine, Bob. How are you?
Fair to partly cloudy today, Bruce. It's Friday, and Friday is my toughest day of the week because it means no tall tales for 2 days. I really like Mondays the best.
Yeah, I'm just leaving work, so I'm ready for the weekend.
Okay. So what can you tell me, Bruce?
No, just a discussion about abortion and the young lady that is a secretary for the Archbishop, who is also press secretary for Lou, who unfortunately is confused about abortion and the church's teaching.
Okay.
I feel that with most people that argue for abortion, especially those who are Catholic, they have a poor understanding of their faith, number one. Number two, we are living in a society today that seems to think that our personal rights trump the right to life and trumps God's commandments. Because it's quite clear that abortion is the killing, the murdering of a child, an unborn child, and a woman's right to do that is absurd, because that life is not a part of her body. It's separate and distinct. And for a woman to have the right to do that goes against all common sense, all good judgment, and right reasoning.
I hear what you're saying, Bruce. I have a feeling that probably Lou Leanne Guerrero is not going to change her mind on that issue.
No, and I think because my brother-in-law is former senator, and we would have this talk a lot. The Democratic platform is firm on women's rights. And because of that, they feel, whether or not they are against abortion themselves personally, that because of women's rights, they have to stick to the platform for abortion, which is a cop-out. Because, you see, as a person in leadership position, it's what they absolutely have to do. They have to stand up for what they believe, because they must understand that the other people that are for abortion, regardless of it being approved by federal law, okay, it goes against God's law. And if you are Catholic, you have to choose between God or mammon. It's as simple as that. But, of course, it all gets muddied with things like rights and who am I to tell no, she probably won't change her mind. And unfortunately, I can't vote for her because of that, because my conscience tells me I cannot.
Okay, Bruce. Thank you very much. It's very well put. I completely understand what you're saying. Thank you for calling.
Okay, Bob. God bless.
And I got Shepard here on line 2. Hello, Shepard.
Hello, Bob. Can you hear me?
I can hear you 5 by 5.
Okay. Great. Love the 5 by 5. This topic, the subject of these, the monikers, life and choice, I couldn't agree with you more. You know, these nicknames, I believe they just serve to make each side feel good about themselves, or some people may use these nicknames to maybe, denigrate the other side. And if we're going to talk civilly as a society, I think we should get rid of the cutesy nicknames, and then use you're pro-abortion or you're anti-abortion, and in this country everyone gets a say. So if you're an extremist, anyone is an extremist on either side, they get heard, but eventually, the adults have to come together in the middle of the table, and those who are, I will tell you I'm anti, but those who are pro don't need to be ashamed. I have family and friends, many who are pro. That doesn't mean they promote it. I understand their position, but I think, as I know you do too, is step one. If we're going to have civil discourse, we need to strip away these things that separate us in a conversation. And I just wanted to weigh in, and then I thought your thoughts were spot on.
Well, thank you very much, Shepard. See, I think you called the other day, and in fact, I think you called a couple times the other day, right? Shepard's gone. So anyhow, good points, Shepard, and we pay a fair amount of perhaps too much attention to words and their usage here on Tall Tales. I suppose that some would think that the P word might apply, the P word, pedantic, that the approach and not playing fast and loose with vocabulary is too pedantic. Hi, Shep, you're back, huh?
Yes, and one of the reasons I really like your show, I learned, like I said last time, I learn a little something every time. Although I already know what pedantic means, as it's a wonderful term. Last week I tried to lighten it up. I don't know if it went so well. Remember, I was a hamburger guy.
Right.
That didn't. I was trying to lighten it up on Kavanaugh Day. I thought that fell flat, but it's English is it's a very important how we come together and not subliminally or otherwise try to undercut the other side. We need to be honest with each other.
Couldn't agree more, Shepard.
Well, how about I say thanks for letting me on.
It's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you, sir. So that was Shepard, who I guess shares my views on the appropriate use of the language. Well, it's already time for the 7th inning stretch, huh, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir. Batter up.
Okay, batter up. And when we come back, I'm going to spend just a minute on that last item on the card, and then we're going to go to the comedy part of the agenda. That is the CLTC scandal part of the agenda.
Family Finance, serving the people of Guam since 1959. Now you can start planning for the holidays by getting a personal Christmas loan from $1,000 up to $3,500. Family Finance has 3 convenient locations to serve you. Give them a call in Dededo, 633-4473, Hagåtña, 475-4545, and the Upper Tumon location on the 2nd floor of the Pacific Building at 647-5626. Get your Christmas loans today from Family Finance.
So the next item on the card is Tom Atta versus Frank Uggan. It's been on the card for a long time under different captions, like at one time it was CLTC versus Saturday Night Live. That's when they came out with that comedy pronouncement that the CLTC had investigated itself and found out that Michael Bora had done nothing wrong. That was... You know, you can't find joke writers like that here on Guam. You'd probably have to go to New York or L.A. To find talent like that, to write your material like that. And there was a subtitle on that one, Tom Atta drinks the Kool-Aid on Ray's show, because Tom Atta was interviewed by Ray, and he went along with that same silly rap. That, well, you know, the CLTC hasn't done anything wrong. We've got to protect the people that relied on the CLTC, you know, like the relatives and employees and things like that that got to skip ahead and get the really good lots. We got to protect those folks. So there's a story in today's PDN, validity of nearly 3,000 leases now in the hands of senators. And jumping right in, Senator Tom Atta this week introduced Bill 356 at the request of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, which sent lawmakers a resolution and a list of the leases in question. And here's a direct quote from Senator Atta. If the bill fails to pass, the effect of that may put a cloud of doubt on the validity of those leases. Senator Atta, a cloud of doubt? Don't you think there's already a cloud of doubt on that whole mess? I can't imagine anything I can't imagine a cloudier sky than the sky that looms over every single Chamorro Land Trust lease and all of the screwing around that has gone on by the Chamorro Land Trust Commission and its legendary staff. And then Tom says, that would be unfortunate. Well, it's already unfortunate. The leaseholders won't have a peace of mind that they are a valid lease. Yeah, well, I don't think anybody has any peace of mind right now. How about those poor fish? And Ray said the whole thing was fishy on the Ray Gibson show when he interviewed Pika Farran. What about those poor fish who stood in line and are still waiting for a lot, and they see a lot on Barragata Heights worth $400,000 and another one worth $700,000 doled out, where they see the Chamorro Land Trust Commission director, Michael Bora, see to it that a road is built to that high-value property when most of the lessees had to deal with the infrastructure themselves. How much peace of mind do those folks have when they saw on TV people confessing to at least misfeasance in office, if not outright malfeasance in office? How much peace of mind do those folks have? And the article goes on to say, Attorney General Anderson issued a May legal opinion stating land trust applicants can't switch places in line. Her office found some leases null and void after reviewing 101 leases of Barragata Trust, land trust property. Just in the Barragata Heights area, 101 of those leases are void because of switching. The Attorney General's opinion also stated that leases are voidable if they were signed without the Commission's explicit approval. So we know that Michael Bora, right up until April, even though the statute said that leases have to be approved by the Commission, was doing it all by himself. We also saw on TV where Pika Farran dropped the dime on David Camacho, the Deputy Director of Land Management, because he had signed some of those leases, and he was publicly ordered, don't have any, you stay away from the Chamorro Land Trust. So, you know, this all, I guess, fits into peace of mind. That's what Tom Atta is after here, is peace of mind. Then the article goes on to say, although its authority to do so was unclear, the Land Trust Commission, after reviewing all leases, voted to ratify 2,877 land leases that it determined were voidable. And one, as the saying goes, in one swell swoop, one fell swoop. No determination as to whether or not there was anything like insider trading or bribes or any misconduct at all. Just do it all at one time. Get it over with. And doing what the Land Trust Commission should have been doing its own. It also identified 102 leases that it believes are null and void, which it cannot retroactively approve. Those leases were issued to people who switched places in line. Land trust applicants should not be penalized for the Commission's mistakes. According to Commission members. Now, I couldn't agree more. Land trust, as your applicant, should not be punished for the Commission's mistakes. But that's exactly what you're doing, Chamorro Land Trust Commission, when you start mass producing approvals of these over 2,000 leases that are voidable. That's exactly what you're doing. You're penalizing the folks who stood in line and tried to do the right thing and don't have any land. You're penalizing them probably for not being as well connected as the folks that got the 102 leases on Barrigada Heights. Atta's bill is intended to resolve both issues. Atta's Committee on Environment, Land Agriculture, and Procurement Reform will hold 2 public hearings on Thursday, October 18. That's 6 days from today, 7 days from yesterday. So you have to, the rule is that you need to give 7 days notice for a public hearing. So Atta couldn't get this done fast enough. He got the resolution, he drafted his bill, he noticed it up for public hearing in a week. And that's why I why I captioned this Tom Atta versus Frank Uggan. Because you'll recall that Frank Uggan is the guy that discovered this whole mess when his constituents reported to him that they had drainage problems because of that road built up the side of Barrigada Heights. This was in April. And Frank Uggan, I pulled up the articles on this. Frank Uggan asked Tom Atta to have an oversight hearing and suggested that it was urgent. And Tom Atta said, urgent because this is an election year? No. Now it's urgent, right? Is it because it's an election year, Tom? And the story goes on to say that there will be a session in October, and it's pretty clear that Tom would like to get this whole thing wrapped up before the election. So the other important element of the story is that Frank had a Bill 285, which would have solved this problem had it been passed back in May. You'll recall that was the bill that would have allowed the governor to appoint a retired judge. The judge's job would be to go in and promulgate regulations, which has never happened, and Tom doesn't know that apparently, reading the story. Promulgate regulations and find out who did what to whom and why, take the appropriate action, promulgate the rules, and set things up so this could never happen again. That bill was introduced in May. It was scheduled for a public hearing on July 13. And remember, Tom said to Frank Uggan, well, why? Because it's an election year. So when the time came for the July 13 hearing, Tom Atta trashed the hearing on Frank Uggan's bill. And I was I was put out myself because I had some dynamite testimony to deliver on that bill, some of which I've shared with you on other occasions. But that bill was exactly what was necessary at the time, and it made the point that only the most naive amongst us would have the idea that the same people that made the mess, benefited from the mess, covered the mess up, etc., that they're going to be the ones to straighten out the mess. And that's exactly what's happened. And Tom wants to aid it and abet it. So he canceled that hearing instead of rescheduling it, and he never put that hearing back he never put that bill back out for hearing. But now, you know, he got a note from the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, and all of a sudden we're going to have a public hearing in a week. That's why this one is captioned as Tom Atta versus Frank Uggan. Now, you're asking, what has Tom Atta got against Frank Uggan? And the best answer that I could give you, and I got to look through my political prism on this one, the best answer I can give you is probably nothing. But Tom Atta is co-chairman of Lou Leon Guerrero's campaign. So anything that would help Frank Uggan doesn't help Lou. So that's the reason he didn't want Frank's bill to come forward. Now, I suspect that yesterday we discussed a little bit who best to pander to. And apparently Tom has decided he's going to pander to the establishment at the Department of Land Management. Maybe we could get a MagPro award for Michael Bora instead of the Ovida Nauto Award, which we've awarded him right here on Tall Tales. So the story goes on. Some senators have already expressed voting against the bill or are lukewarm to the idea, including Senator Mike San Nicolas and Lee. Lee has said her mother, who was on the waiting list, transferred her lease to Lee for the benefit of Lee's children. Months ago, I formally rejected in writing any claim I had to a CLTC lease. Well, that's good. I did this because trust is important, and I did not want to benefit from our government's mistakes. Moreover, I will not vote on or be present for any deliberations on this specific matter. Atta, who is not seeking re-election, said he hopes senators will vote on the bill based on what they know is right. Well, then they're going to vote against it, Tom, if they vote on what they know is right. And he says, and not what they think would affect their chances in the general election. It seems that when it's legislation, et cetera, Tom Atta can't get that idea out of his head. Frank Uggan, his remark to Frank Uggan, why? Because it's an election year? So he hopes that senators will vote on what they know is right and not what they think would affect their chances in the general election. I hope the vote, if it is cast before November 6th, would be the same if it's cast after November 6th. How about if it had been cast in May on Frank Uggan's bill, Senator Atta? Lee, chairperson of the Democratic Party of Guam, said between work, the kids, and paying bills, you shouldn't have to wonder whether government knows its own laws. The reality that hundreds of families played by the rules as our government understood them, you know, like the one where your sister's in the mainland and you have her swap places with your daughter and make sure that she gets one of those nice Barragata Heights lots. Remember that set of rules? Or the rules that allow Michael Bora to sign a lease in two places as both the government and the lessee, even though he shouldn't have signed. It should have been and see, that would have been the genius of referring that lease to the commission, because the commission probably wouldn't want to see the signature of its own director on a lease for Chamorro Land Trust property. That was the genius in that collegial approach to approving those leases that Bora just ignored. So You're in the right church, Senator Lee, but I'm afraid you're in the wrong pew. When it comes to people having faith in the government following the rules, that applies to those unconnected folks that are still saying, I wonder if I will ever get a lease in the Chamorro Land Trust. And then she goes on to say, the reality that hundreds of families played by the rules as our government understood them and still may lose should be disturbing to all of us. It disturbs me to no end. That's why I keep kvetching about it here on Tall Tales. It disturbs me so much that it happened, and no one seems to want to hold anyone accountable for what happened, for what they did wrong or what they did not do right. That's just not the way a government should operate. And that should disturb you too, Senator Lee, although you claim you don't want to participate in this one. Tommy Morrison said the legislature may require additional presentations and legal guidance before it acts on the land trust's request. Well, be careful with the legal guidance, because Pico Fearan found out that the commission could ratify those 102 switching leases by talking to other lawyers. We don't know who the lawyers were. I suspect that they were lawyers that represented those leaseholders. The first public hearing will be held 3 p.m. on Thursday to receive testimony mainly from the Land Trust, while the 6 p.m. hearing would be to hear testimony from the general public. And if we complete the committee report within days, the bill may be on the agenda for the next session scheduled for the week of October 22. I'll finish this up going into the home stretch.
Security Title is honored to join in sponsoring Ray Gibson on The Point. Half a day. I'm Rita Tidegui of Manila, and this is where I start my day, listening to the voices of our community and sharing thoughts about issues that affect all of us. It all boils down to our people and our land. Ingatan ang iyong tahanan. Protect your home. When purchasing or refinancing your home, remember to call the professionals at Security Title, just like you call Ray Gibson in the morning.
Well, we got a couple Facebookers here who came in for the home stretch. Daryl, always good to see your name on Facebook. Letitia Lujan, thank you for the kind words. Kazendo, we do the best we can to drain the swamp right here on Facebook and on 93.3 Tall Tales. So going back to this story, this is another quote from Tom Atta. If we complete the committee report within days, the bill may be on the agenda for the next session scheduled for October 22 through 26. Fernando Esteves and Will Castro are reserving comment at this time until they have fully reviewed the commission's resolutions. There's a little bit more to review than that, guys, but since the Land Trust Commission conducted the investigation, I suspect that there is no report of the investigation, and if there were, it wouldn't be worth the paper it's printed on. Atta said the legislature is also waiting for another resolution from the Land Trust which covers recommended land changes to improve the processes of issuing residential and agricultural leases moving forward. You know, that's like asking Bernie Madoff to come in and help the Securities and Exchange Commission develop rules that will make it easier to catch people who are doing Ponzi schemes. The law clearly says leases should be awarded on a first-come, first-served basis as well as based on priority levels. But these requirements also present some issues, Ada said. For example, a person applied in 1995 when he didn't have A land yet. Years later, after the individual already has A land because he worked hard, and then land leases are started to be awarded, and the person nonetheless got a lease, Ada said. He said the laws and rules need to be updated and clarified. Well, that's why the Chamorro Land Trust, as enacted in the 12th Guam legislature, gave the Chamorro Land Trust, the commission, the authority to promulgate rules to deal with exactly things like this, or things, other things that I've reported on here, that a person's name comes up and he says, I'll waive it, I want to see what else is out there. You develop rules, and then you say, and you deal with those very things. If a person had no land at the time he applied and acquired land after his application was submitted, then he would be placed in the order of succession where he would belong, given the fact that he now has land. In other words, he would go ahead of every other landless applicant. That's the reason that statutes have a provision for rules, because the legislature can't think of every potential eventuality that's going to come along in the administration of a statutory scheme. And in theory, the agency that deals with such things ought to have some expertise and ought to be able to put together rules and regulations. You notice I said in theory. So when it comes to conveyancing land and things like that, you'd think that the Department of Land Management would have some expertise in that. As you well know, that is not my experience at all. My experience personal experience was exactly the opposite from that, but that is the theory. And the way the regulatory process works is the statute must have standards. It must say standards along the lines that may promulgate rules and regulations that make sure that the land is, the leases are dispensed in an orderly, ethical fashion, and the first come, first served order as nearly as practical, etc., those kinds of standards. Then the agency puts together those rules and sends them to the legislature. If the legislature takes no action, 90 days later, those rules become official. If the legislature doesn't like the rules, it can introduce a bill, pass a bill, governor signs, or veto is overridden, rejecting the bills, rejecting the rules. Then the rules do not become effective. Or the legislature can introduce a bill to approve the rules, passes, et cetera, rules are approved. That's all the legislature can do. When the legislature attempts to amend a rule, it's no longer a rule. It then becomes a statute and can only be amended by a statute. So there are no rules and regulations for the Chamorro Land Trust Act. Now, this guy over here, the smart money, is saying, yeah, well, what about Public Law 2338? It's got the Paul Berdalio rules in it. And that is a classic example of what I'm talking about. The legislature passed a law, Public Law 2338, and the substance of that law was something called the Paul Berdalio rules. But they weren't rules, it was a statute. And because it was a statute, it never wound up in the Guam Administrative Rules website on the compiler's website. And because the statute was not properly titled and configured into code sections, it doesn't show up in any of the tools that lawyers would use to find things. So the only way that you could find the Paul Berdalio rules is through oral history. I don't know, maybe if you put a piece of string between two tin cans and put one of the tin cans down at the legislature, hooked it up to a time machine or something, you could find it out. But it's just horrible. So there are no rules right now. There is a statute that's very poorly done, and there's a command in the Land Trust Act that says that the Land Trust Commission should enact rules, but it never did. So this whole thing is a colossal failure of people who didn't do what they were supposed to have done, of people who did things that they shouldn't have done, of what would be insider trading in the financial world, clearly flies in the face of any ethical rules in opposition to nepotism, things we've talked about here, things that most of the folks out there in our international radio listening audience have seen on television. And the sad thing is that the solution was available. Frank Uggan came up with a solution, and Tom Atta just trashed it. He wouldn't let it see the light of day. He had all kinds of time until right now, and now he's in a big hurry to hold that hearing and to get the bill on the legislature's agenda. And, of course, I can only ask his question. Why? Because it's an election year, and you somehow figured out that by doing this, it will benefit your... After masangan si Palawan it's not Gaza. I know there's a word, the female word for Gaza, Gadzu. I'll have to ask my informant how to say that. So is that why you're doing that, Tom? Because is that why you took no action when you should have on this whole land trust thing, just so you could benefit Lulian Guerrero? I would really appreciate some kind of an explanation, as I suppose a lot of other folks would. In the meantime, for all of you folks that signed up back in 1995 and weren't able to get any land, I hope you can show up at that public hearing and pick up on some of this stuff, especially, what was it Senator Lee said? Trust applicants should not be penalized for the Commission's mistakes. And all of you folks who didn't get your leases because the insiders got them, you've been penalized because of the government's mistakes. So come to the end of another perfect day here on Tall Tales. I regret to tell you that I won't be seeing you tomorrow or Sunday. No Tall Tales on the weekend. I'll be very anxious to get back together here on Facebook, on the phone, right here on Tall Tales. Este lunes. Adios.
The Point is KUSG. Hagat Guam.